And first of all, let us speak a little bit, not too much, about the historical background of the book. Because it could be very, very important for us to understand some issues which are behind the stage. And first of all, we need to understand the dating of the Exodus. And one text that helps us to understand the time span or when the Exodus took place is the first book of Kings, chapter 6 and verse 1. In the 480th year after the people of Israel came out of the land of Egypt, in the 4th year of Solomon's reign over Israel, in the month of Ziv, which is the second month, he began to build the house of the Lord. So actually this text connects two dates, the date of Exodus from Egypt and the date of building the temple. Of course, if you read some liberal scholars, like for example Julius Wellhausen, he assumed that actually this date 480 years is not a literal, we cannot understand it literally, but he says that it is a symbolic date, and actually he wants to connect the exodus of Egypt, from Egypt with the building of the temple and the destruction of the temple. But of course, we believe that this text is a literal text and it tells us the exact date of Exodus. So the time of the building of the temple is very well known, and it is 966 year before the Christ. So if we add 480 years to 966, we will get 100 or 1445 year before Christ. So of course, there is another tradition, and according to another tradition, the Exodus took place during the reign of Ramses II, and it is in the 13th century. But we still believe in this date, and most of the conservative scholars believe that Exodus took place in 15th century. And when we speak about the chronology, we have two chronologies, long chronology and short chronology. And here, this chronology is how to explain the time span that happened after or before the Exodus. And we have this problem, because if you read Exodus verse 12 and chapter 12 and verse 40, so according to this text, it means that, let me read it. This is the time the people of Israel spent in Egypt. So according to Exodus 12, it was 400 years. The time that the Israelites lived in Egypt was 430 years. At the end of 430 years, on that same day, all the Lord's military divisions went out from the land of Egypt. And so according to this text, the sons of Israel spent 430 years in Egypt. So at the moment when Jacob and his family came down to Egypt until the Exodus, 430 years passed. So this is the first idea of the long chronology. But if we read the epistle of Paul to Galatians, chapter 3, in verse 17, we will find another date. So actually, Paul says that from Abraham, from the call of Abraham, which happens in Genesis 12, up to Exodus, took place 430 years, the same date. So in this case, it looks like people of Israel spent less time in Egypt than 430 years. So usually scholars say about two chronologies, long chronology and short chronology. And according to the long chronology, actually long chronology is 215 years longer than the short chronology. So this is the long chronology. Let us look at it. So do you see from the building of the temple from Exodus to the building of the temple, we have 478 years. So we have 430 years of living in Egypt, and this is the date when Jacob came down to Egypt. And the call of Abraham happened in year 2090, when he was 75 years old. So this is the long chronology. The short chronology makes it just here, according to the short chronology, from the call of Abraham till Exodus, we have 430 years. Temple, Exodus, and 430 years, the call of Abraham. So is it clear? It is clear that it is 215 years short chronology than the long chronology. Actually, among the Adventists, it is not a dogmatic issue which chronology do you think is better or more reliable. But among the Adventists, the short chronology, and not only among the Adventists, among many other scholars, the short chronology is more preferable than the long chronology. So why the short chronology is more preferable? There are several arguments for that. And first argument is the genealogy that we can find in the book of Exodus, chapter 6, verses 16 to 20. So do you see in this text, we have a genealogy of Aaron and Moses. And from Levi to Aaron and Moses, between them, there are only two generations, if you can see. Levi, Kohat, Amram, and after that we have Aaron and Moses. So these generations better fit the short chronology, like 215 years, than 430 years. But of course, some scholars can say that sometimes in the chronology, there are some gaps in the chronology. For example, not all the generations are mentioned in the chronology. But we do not have any assumption or any basis to think like this, and most probably the short chronology better fits the overall context of the book of Exodus and Genesis. Do you have any questions about the chronology? Yes, please.
Sorry, Prof. I wanted to ask, is there any variation in terms of the textual witness?
No.
In Exodus? So all of them have 430 years.
There is not any textual variations about that. So that is why it's very difficult to explain these two different sources. How scholars usually explain this date in Exodus chapter 12 and verse 40? Usually they say that most probably at that time already Canaan was considered as a part of Egypt, because Canaan was a kind of a buffer zone between different world empires like Hittites and Egypt, and officially it was considered a part of Egypt. Even later on, for example, the very famous stele of Merneptah, one of the Egyptians pharaoh. This stele is famous. Oh no, I'm mistaken. Not this stele, but another records of another pharaoh. and it is related to the people of the sea. Today, scholars believe that people of the sea are the Philistines. So they came from the north, and they settled in Canaan. But in one of the Egyptians' inscriptions, we can find the pharaoh who is fighting with the people of the sea. So there is even an image of people who came from the sea on the boats, and pharaoh is fighting with them. And this pharaoh later on says that actually those people of the sea came and they wanted to settle in Egypt, but he drove them away, so he got victory over them, and he allowed them, he says, I allowed them to settle in Canaan. So do you see the rhetoric of the pharaoh? Most probably, Pharaoh didn't allow them to settle in Canaan because at that time he didn't have any control over Canaan. But he wants to say that actually Canaan is my territory, something that is depending on me. Okay, so we can see that, and we will see just a little bit later that even such pharaohs like Thutmose is the third, and some others, they made they made some trips, military campaigns in Canaan. The only thing that they didn't conquer the country in general, but it looks like they control this territory. So because the Egyptians, they didn't have, their tactic or their strategy was just to make short campaigns. Like, for example, if people are free from farming, so they made an army and they went to the other countries, mostly to Canaan, and they took something from the country and came back. So that is why it's very difficult to speak about this more precisely, but we can assume that Canaan was considered a territory dependent upon Egypt. Okay, any other questions?
Thank you, Prof.
Just remember these two themes, and especially this text, 1 Kings 6:1, because I don't remember, but it seems to me it can be in the quiz. Okay, so now let us speak about the history of Egypt. So I don't have here one very interesting image from one of the tombs of Egypt. And in one of those tombs, there is a caravan, the picture of the caravan, Medinat Habu. This is the picture from Medinat Habu, and you can find it even in internet. And on this picture, you can see some people with birds. You know that the Egyptians usually didn't have birds, but some people with birds came to Egypt, and they were most probably, it was the first picture of the Semitic people who came to Egypt. And who knows, maybe Jacob and his sons looked exactly like that. Okay, so what happens in the history of Egypt? The history of Egypt usually divides on three periods. The so-called Old Kingdom, Middle Kingdom, and New Kingdom. So what happened during the Old Kingdom of Egypt? During that period of time, we know that it is the oldest period, and it was the time when the famous pyramids were built. But such projects like pyramids, of course, took a lot of investments from pharaohs, and very soon pharaohs were not able to do this kind of projects. And finally, what we can see, the economy of Egypt went down, and the first transmission period started. So we have like Old Kingdom. After that, we have a first transition period. After that, we have Middle Kingdom, second transition period, and after that, we have New Kingdom. So this what happened during the Old Kingdom. After that, we have Middle Kingdom, but it is not interesting for us very much. And we will be more interested in the second transmission period and the new kingdom. So what happened during this second period from between the Middle Kingdom and the New Kingdom? We know that at that time Egypt was very, very weak as a country, and it was also the time when the power in the country was given to so-called Hyksos. And Hyksos, how they are called in Egypt, Hekakasut, these are some rulers, some foreign rulers. And so they came to the country in the 17th century, and they ruled for a while. So what we know about the history of Egypt is there was one very famous. Do you remember already during the Hellenistic time in Alexandria was the very, very famous library, and the rulers of Egypt at that time, Ptolemies, they were very educated and they wanted to collect as many books as possible. So they gave order to one of the monks, and his name was Manetho, to write a history of Egypt. So he is the one who wrote the history of Egypt from the very beginning till his own time. And he had access to some archives, and he was able to write a very, very nice book, which was called Aegyptica. But unfortunately, you know that the library in Alexandria was burned, and many books have not survived. And the history of Manetho also didn't survive. And we know about this history only from other authors who quoted Manetho in their books. So that is why we know just a little bit about this history. And he's the one who divided the history of Egypt on 30 dynasties. And later on, the history was divided on this Old, Middle, and New Kingdom. So I want to go back to the Hyksos. What we know about Hyksos that they were, most probably they were Semites, Semitic people. So they came to Egypt. We don't know how they came to Egypt, and we don't know how they got the power in Egypt. What we know about them is most probably that they didn't rule over entire Egypt, but they ruled only in the northern Egypt or lower Egypt. And but sometimes maybe their power also was extended to the southern Egypt or upper Egypt. So they ruled in Egypt not for a long time. We know that in the 1550s, Pharaoh Ahmose I he actually expelled Hyksos from Egypt, and they went to Canaan actually. And in Canaan there was a city which was called Sharuchen, and they went to this city Sharuchen, and Ahmose I actually sieged the city, and he tried to destroy them completely. So after that, we know nothing about Hyksos. So they just disappear from the stage, and they are not mentioned in any other sources. And Ahmose I was the founder of the 18th dynasty. And since this 18th dynasty, we have a new kingdom in Egypt. new kingdom. And this kingdom is very, very interesting for us. But what I would like to tell you about that. So do you see, it happens in the 17th century, and let us go back a little bit to this chronology. So do you see the call of Abraham happens in 19th century. So 17th century is approximately, if we deduct 215 years from this, we will have what is this, 1650 or about the 60. And this is the time when Jacob and his family came down to Egypt. And this is exactly the 17th century. And we can assume, of course, we cannot be sure, that when Joseph was sold to Egypt, the Hyksos were already in power at that time. And maybe it can explain why Joseph was promoted to be the second person after the Pharaoh, because do you see, if Hyksos were from Semitic origin, and Joseph was from Semitic origin, so it's clear why Pharaoh was very good to Joseph and to his family when they came down to Egypt, and he gave them the best land, and he accepted them very, very well. And what happened after that? When Pharaoh Ahmose I came to the power, he actually was from another dynasty. He was very hostile to the Hyksos, and he was fighting with the Hyksos. And it explains why in the first chapter in the book of Exodus, we can read that the new Pharaoh came to power who didn't know Joseph. So do you see, everything fits this pattern very, very well. So what happened afterwards? The first four kings of the new dynasty, Ahmose, Amenhotep, Thutmose I and Thutmose II, ruled in total 65 years. And during this time, they managed to achieve political and economical unity of the whole country. Only Thutmose I made aggressive campaigns. He conquered Nubia, which was independent during the rule of the Hyksos, and made a campaign to Palestine and Syria. So do you see, they made some campaigns to Palestine and Syria, and they tried to conquer it. The Egyptian text indicates that he even reached the Euphrates, which flows down instead of flowing upwards. And yeah, it's true. So we can assume that he really, we can believe that he really went as far as Syria, because the origin of Euphrates starts exactly in Syria. So Thutmose I was very famous pharaoh who made many campaigns. But his son Thutmose II was not very famous, and he ruled not for a long time. And some people said that he was sick, he was ill, maybe some mental illness, we do not know exactly. But what Thutmose I did, he married Thutmose II to his sister, and his sister is very, very famous because her name is Hatshepsut. As I said, Thutmose II lived not a long life, but his widow Hatshepsut, and he was actually his sister and the daughter of Thutmose I, but most probably they were not from the same mother. They could be from different mothers, we do not know. She became a woman pharaoh, and it looks like she was the first woman pharaoh known to us. And she was very successful as a queen of Egypt, and she ruled more than 20 years. She was not a military person. She didn't do any military campaign, but on the contrary, she tried to build the economy of the country, and she made some successful merchant trips. He sent some successful merchant trips to Punt. People said that this is the modern Somalia or Somali. Developed mines in Nubia and Sinai. So she was very successful as a queen, and she didn't have any children. And her successor was Thutmose III, but he was her nephew, and they ruled together for a while. But people say that actually Thutmose III and Hatshepsut were not friends, so they were like enemies. And after Hatshepsut died, Thutmose III even tried to raise the memory of her, but of course it was impossible. But even now in Egypt, you can find the stela of Hatshepsut, and what he tried to do. This is actually there are two stelas, one of Hatshepsut and another of Thutmose I, it seems to me. So this one is not the stela of Hatshepsut, because stela of Hatshepsut has a wall around it. So what Thutmose III wanted to do, he couldn't destroy the stela, and so he gave an order to build a wall around it, so that nobody could read what is written there. And what is written on the stela are some description of the reign of Hatshepsut. So he didn't want people read this account of her reign, of her rulership. So this is also very famous temple. This is Temple of Hatshepsut in the Valley of the Kings or Valley of the Queens, and this is her funeral temple. So this is the place where she was buried. And sometimes people say that Thutmose III actually helped her to die, but of course it's very difficult now to know exactly what happened at that time. But this temple remained after her, and if you have opportunity to go to Egypt, please go there and see how beautiful the temple was and is. And also you can find some pictures on the walls of the temple, the pictures of her merchant trips to Somalia, and some other interesting details you can find there. So this is the Hatshepsut temple. So what about Thutmose III? He reigned for 33 years, and he was very, very successful pharaoh of Egypt. He became the most powerful pharaoh of the 18th dynasty, and almost every year he did a military campaign to Palestine in Syria. And he conquered all Palestine and Syria, and he was one of the most successful, as I said, pharaohs in Egypt. But pay attention to the years of his reign. He reigned from 1482 up to 50 before Christ. But I want also to mention one important detail when we speak about the chronology of Egypt. For example, if you go to internet and if you try to check the dates of his reign, you will see that different websites will give you different dates. So why it happened? Because the chronology of Egypt also, it is like established right now, especially after Kitchen. His name is Kitchen. I forgot his first name. The famous Egyptologist. He spent a lot of time trying to reconstruct the chronology of Egypt. But anyway, the chronology of Egypt is a little bit not certain. And why it happened like this? Do you remember I told you that Manetho divided the history of Egypt on 30 dynasties. But the problem is that he didn't give any dates for those dynasties, so we cannot know exactly. And there is a suspicion that many of the dynasties could rule together. So there was an overlapping between different dynasties. For example, some scholars say that when Hyksos ruled in the Lower Egypt, in the Upper Egypt, there was another dynasty that was the Egyptian dynasty, and they ruled together at the same time. So that is why, because of this overlapping, and the scholars do not know how long those overlapping lasted, because of that, the history of Egypt is not very certain. And there is another problem. Egypt was quite far from other countries. So Egypt is not related or connected very much with the Mesopotamia, Assyria, and some other empires. And because of that, it is very difficult to make correlation between the chronology of Egypt and chronology of other countries. But what I would like to mention here as well is that when we go back to the reign of Hatshepsut, and do you see she reigned from 1504 until 1482, and when we compare it with the life of Moses, so what we can see, Moses in 1445 BC was 80 years old. So if we add, just a minute, 1445, sorry, plus 80, we will have that Moses was born in 1525 BC. And so at that time, Queen Hatshepsut could be just a princess in the house of his father. And we can assume, of course, it is not certain at all, but we can assume that Hatshepsut was exactly the daughter of Pharaoh who adopted Moses. And when she adopted Moses, we can understand the rivalry that could take place in the court of Pharaoh, because Thutmose III wanted to be next ruler of Egypt, next Pharaoh, and Moses looks like Moses was his rival candidate to be the Pharaoh in Egypt. Okay. So, but Thutmose III just died 5 years before Exodus, and it also fits very well the biblical history. So, do you remember in the chapter 4 of the book of Exodus, Moses is said that all who wanted to kill him, actually died. And it looks quite plausible that Thutmose III was the one who had some tensions with Moses when Moses was in Egypt. So after that, so this is about Thutmose III, that he left some garrisons in some strategic points in West Asia. But as I told you, they just made a military campaign to Palestine, to Syria, and they came back. So they didn't stay there for a long time. just only small garrisons. This is the everything. This is the all that they do when they conquered the Palestine. And what happened after that? After that, we have Amenhotep II, and you see the dates of his reign. He was the son of Thutmose III, who may have been the pharaoh of Exodus, and he became famous for being a very cruel ruler. He ruthlessly suppressed all the uprising that often rose in his vast empire. So maybe he was the pharaoh of Exodus, but I want to stress once again that the pharaoh of Exodus is not known. So there is no name of pharaoh in the book of Exodus, and we cannot be sure who was exactly the pharaoh of Exodus. Yes, in this, in relation to this, it is important to note that actually the names in the book of Exodus are very important because in Hebrew the book of Exodus is called Shemot, and Shem is a name in Hebrew, and Shemot means names. Velecha Shemot, Vele Shemot. I don't remember how it is, how it sounds in Hebrew, but it doesn't matter. So the names are important. Why? Do you see in the first chapters of the book of Exodus, we can see the names of the people of Israel who came down to Egypt. And after that, in the first chapter, we can see that Pharaoh tries to kill the people of Israel because they are multiplying and they are very numerous. So he is afraid that the people of Israel can rebel against Pharaoh, and Pharaoh didn't want to have a problem. And what is interesting, the Bible tells us about the names of two midwives who helped Israelites women when they gave birth to their children. So the names of the midwives are mentioned in the book of Exodus, but the name of Pharaoh is not mentioned. And maybe it has a meaning that the names of the midwives are mentioned and the names of the Pharaoh is not mentioned. The author consciously gives us the names of only positive characters. Negative characters remain anonymous. They have no names and they do not have salvation. So that is why we can say that the Pharaoh of Exodus remains unknown. So we don't know his name because he is just a negative character of the book. Yes, do you have any questions?
I have just missed the name of the person who wrote the history of Egypt.
So his name is Manetho. I can write it in the message. Wait, chat. I can write it in the chat.
All right.
It is a very famous name, and you can find it in Wikipedia. If something is written about him, I'm more than sure. And his work, Aegyptica, is very famous, but unfortunately, it has not survived. Okay, so can we proceed?
Yeah, we can. I don't know others.
So let us speak about the structure of the book of Exodus. I would like to divide it on two parts. The first part is about the Exodus from Egypt, and these are the chapters from 1 to 15. And the second part is from 19 to 40, And this is the narrative of what happened at Mount Sinai. And the chapters from 16 to 18 are transitional, so they are just a change of the stage from Egypt to Sinai. So this is just a short explanation of the structure of the book. So also we can present the structure of the book as two parts, like anticipation of the salvation. God saves Moses, God commissioned Moses, and fulfillment. God saves Israel and God commissioned Israel. And already here we can see very interesting parallels. The life of Moses is parallel to the life of the entire nation. And we can find that these parallels could be extended. So just, yeah, like this, for example. Here you can see those parallels, Moses and Israel. Immediately after birth, Moses' life is in danger. He was saved due to a plan developed and executed by two women, his mother and sister. Israel's life is in danger in the beginning of the book. The people are saved due to the actions of also two women, midwives. Pharaoh wants to kill Moses, who flees from Egypt, and Pharaoh pursues him. Pharaoh tries to destroy the Israelites. They run away from Egypt, and again Pharaoh pursues them. Moses comes to Mount Sinai, Horeb, where he meets God. People come to Mount Sinai, where they meet God. God proclaimed to Moses that he is going to fulfill the promises given to the patriarchs. Moses should help him with this. In the beginning, Moses doesn't agree, and God's anger kindled against him. Oh, sorry, I have something in Russian here. I forgot to translate. So the same, God made a covenant with Israel. They are not faithful, and God's anger is kindled against them. And God wants to destroy them or kill them. So the same as with Moses. On the way to Egypt, the angel tries to kill Moses, and Zipporah's petition saves him. The threat of death looms over all Israelites because of disobedience. Moses' petition saved them. So we can see that between Moses and Israel, there are many, many parallels. And Moses is like a symbol or type of Israel as a nation. Everything that happened to Moses in the first chapters of the book of Exodus is repeated again with the entire nation later on. And it seems to me there are some more parallels. Just as the people have committed sin in the wilderness and cannot enter the promised land, Moses also commits a sin and cannot enter the promised land. So we can see that those parallels are between Moses and the people. Yes, please, Pastor Posol.
Yes, Prof. Just something very simple. Please translate that before putting the notes in after class.
Oh yeah, okay.
Thank you.
Okay. I will do this. Just if I forget, just remind me again. Yeah.
Okay.
And do you remember we already mentioned that the book of Exodus is very closely related to both the previous book, Genesis, and subsequent books, Leviticus and Numbers. And the connection with the previous context is clearly visible at the very beginning of the book, which lists the names of Israelites who have moved to Egypt. As for the subsequent context, the book of Exodus provides the basis for all following history. In the text of the book of Exodus, different blocks of material alternate each other with a certain regularity, the narrative block and the block of laws and regulations, and then again the narrative block. So do you remember we spoke about the same structure or similar structure when we speak about the Pentateuch in general, and we spoke that there is a change of narrative, poetry, and epilogue. So in the book of Exodus, we can find a very interesting combination of narrative and the blocks of legislation. And I would like to add something here. So in order to understand the legislation, we need to understand the context, why the legislation was given. So we cannot interpret the laws of the Old Testament, especially the laws of the Pentateuch, separately from the context. I will give you several examples how the laws and the context are related to each other. For example, so one very first example, or one first argument is that do you see in our modern tradition we are used to have all laws combined in one book or in one codex or whatever. But in the book of Exodus and also in the book of Leviticus, we cannot see this kind of one book, but we can see a mixture of narrative and legislation material. And just a very simple example is Leviticus 16. Leviticus 16. So why this law is given? This law, when you open the first verse of the Leviticus 16, so it gives you some hint or clue why God gives this law. The Lord spoke to Moses after the death of two of Aaron's sons, when they approached the presence of the Lord and died. Do you see? The idea is that God gave this regulation of Yom Kippur and everything after Nadav and Abihu died, when they entered the holy place and brought the foreign fire to that place. So it is clear here that God doesn't give all laws immediately, but he gives the laws when there is a necessity for them. For example, if there is a situation that requires some laws, some regulations, God gives those regulations. Or another example is Numbers chapter 19. And this is the law about the red heifer. And red heifer is actually about the purification, if somebody touched the dead body. And there is a simple question. So in the book of Numbers, we mostly do not have any legislation or any laws. So why do we have this law exactly in the book of Numbers, but not in the book of Leviticus or book of Deuteronomy, where the most of the laws were given? And the answer is very simple. Actually, do you see this law about the red heifer is given almost in the end of their journey in the wilderness. And during their journey in the wilderness, in the end of their journey in the wilderness, many people started dying. And of course, they needed somehow to bury them. And of course, it is impossible to bury a person without touching him or her. So in this case, they needed special regulation about how to purify themselves after touching the dead bodies. So do you see, God gives a law when this law is needed. And that is why we do not have all the laws in one place, and the laws are scattered or spread around the narrative text of the book of Exodus, Leviticus, and Deuteronomy. Okay, so what we can have here. Exodus 19, making a covenant. Exodus 20, this is a narrative actually. Exodus 20 is the text of the commandments. After that, we have a small narrative portion about the fear of the Israelites. And after that, we have the so-called covenant code. And again, we have Exodus 24 is about how covenant was done, how he was made. And here we have instructions on building the tabernacle. After that, we have a story about the sin of the golden calf. And again, we have the code of priests. And again, we have some story about worshiping idols. And again, we have the holiness code. So do you see the narrative and the legislations are intertwined with each other. What we can find already in the beginning of the book of Exodus, do you remember the main theme of the book of Pentateuch, partially fulfilled and partially non-fulfilled promises. So in the beginning of the book of Exodus, we can see that one of the promises have been already fulfilled. But the people of Israel were fruitful and increased greatly. They multiplied and grew exceedingly strong, so that the land was filled with them. So we can see that God promised Abraham and his descendants that they will be a great nation. So in the beginning of the book of Exodus, we can see that Israel is already a great nation. So they are multiplying and they are very, very numerous, so that Pharaoh is afraid of them. Also, we can find some very interesting inclusio, and this inclusio is taken from the book of Selhammer, Pentateuch's narrative, and he actually says that the entire story of Exodus from Egypt and traveling in the wilderness is framed by two similar narratives. And one narrative is in Exodus 1, when we have a Pharaoh who tries to destroy the people of Israel, and another narrative in the book of Numbers in chapter 24 up to 22 up to 24, when we have Balak, the king of Moab, who also tries to destroy the Israelites, but he understands that he cannot do it military, so he hired a prophet, Balaam, to curse Israel. And there are many parallels between these two stories. Like in the beginning, Israel is described as a great nation, Rav ve'atzum, numerous and strong. And the same description we can find in the book of Numbers. So Israel is a great nation, Rav ve'atzum. Pharaoh made 3 attempts to not to destroy, but to stop the blessing, because people are blessed, and because they are blessed, they are multiplying, because it's part of the blessing, part of the promise. And Pharaoh tries to stop this blessing. And Balak also tries to curse Israel, and also 3 times. And it was also like an attempt to stop a blessing. But Israel is multiplying even more, and in the case of the story of Balak and Balaam, Israel is blessed. What is interesting, Pharaoh hardens his heart later on, and the same expression is mentioned in the story of Balaam, when it is said that the Lord deprives the honor, and honor is kavod, or glory, from Balaam. And you remember that the word kavod has 2 meanings. It has a meaning connected to glory, and another meaning is to make heavy, to be heavy. So now we have a story about how the Moses was born in chapter 2. And Moses is presented as the second Noah. Like Noah saved, was a savior for the people during the flood. Moses is also the savior. And what connects the story of Moses with the story of Noah is the basket that mother made for him. And the word basket, teva, is the same word as used to designate the ark made by Noah. And so Moses is presented as a new hero, a new character who will succeed the story of the patriarch. So he is a new patriarch. And we can see it here, like, for example, Moses saved one Israelite from oppression, and after that, Moses saved the entire nation from oppression. Moses gave water to the daughters of Jethro, and Moses gave water to the entire nation. So we can see some, like, also parallels in the story of Moses. And yeah, now the doubts of Moses. So let us make a short break and we will continue after the short break. But before we go to the break, do you have any questions? Okay, if not, let's make a break. Okay, so now we spoke about Moses, who was second Noah, and also he was a second character, second patriarch, and he continues the line of the patriarchs. So now let us speak about the portrait of Moses in the first chapters of the book of Exodus. So when we look at the first chapters of the book of Exodus, we can see that Moses is not presented as the person of faith. On the contrary, we can see that there are a lot of doubts in his mind. So, for example, God several times asked Moses to fulfill the mission, but he many times refused to do this. To be exact, 4 times Moses refuses to fulfill the mission. And actually, when even in the end, in chapter 4, he agreed to fulfill the mission, he doesn't do it willingly, because we can see in Exodus chapter 4 and verse 14, the anger of the Lord was kindled against Moses. So Moses did it, but because he was forced to do it by God. So was Moses convinced? The text leaves an impression that Moses is simply forced to go. He doesn't go by his own will. It's very interesting that in Exodus chapter 4 and verse 18, we can see that he speaks to his father-in-law. And when he speaks to his father-in-law, he doesn't tell him that actually he had a revelation from God and God sent him to Egypt. But he just says that I want to see, maybe some of my relatives are still alive, so I would like to see them. So do you see all these details tell us that actually Moses is not convinced in the beginning. Furthermore, we can see, no, I forgot one slide to tell you about one slide. We can see that the identity of Moses is changing through the entire narrative. And this identity, Moses' identity, also underscores his doubts that he has inside. For example, in the beginning of the story, we can see that Moses is identified as a son of somebody from the tribe of Levi. So it's true, it is clear that Moses is a Levite, he is an Israelite. But later on, we can see that daughter of Pharaoh took him to the palace and also gave him a name. So he got a name from the daughter of Pharaoh. So it looks like he, from being an Israelite, became an Egyptian. And later on, it is written that he didn't want to be an Egyptian, he wanted to be an Israelite. But what is interesting, even his own people do not recognize him as his own person, because when he wanted to, two people were arguing with each other, 2 Israelites, and he wanted to tell them something, they just didn't accept him. So finally, he is fleeing from Egypt, and he came to, and he met 2 daughters of Jephthah. And when he met 2 daughters of Jephthah, it's very interesting that they characterize him as an Egyptian. When father asked him, who helped you? They said, one Egyptian came and saved us from other shepherds. So it looks like Moses, the identity of Moses is always changing. He is Israelite. After that, he is an Egyptian, again Israelite, again Egyptian. And in chapter 3, it's very interesting. In chapter 3, in the first verse of the chapter, he is neither Egyptian nor Israelite, but he is just a man without nationality. Meanwhile, Moses was shepherding the flock of his father-in-law, Jethro, the priest of Midian. So he is just a son of the law of one Midianite priest, and nothing is said about who he is. So do you see? And all these doubts of Moses with the fact that he, in the end, he didn't feel himself an Israelite. Even one of his sons was not circumcised. So if his son was not circumcised, it means that he actually already forgot about his origin. So he didn't want to transmit his nationality, his ethnic identity to his sons. So in the beginning of the book of Exodus, we can see that Moses is portrayed as a man of doubts. So he is not very sure, shall he go and fulfill the mission of God or not? But of course, this picture changes, and it changes a little bit later in the narrative. But before we go to the next part of the story of Exodus, I would like to pay just a little your attention to some narrative features of the book of Exodus. Actually, the first part of the book of Exodus we can present as a standard narrative with the standard narrative structure. So there was a very famous German scholar, Freytag, or Freytag, I don't know what the true pronunciation of his name, Gustav Freytag. He studied the plays of Shakespeare, and he found out that all the plays follow the same structure. And the structure is very, very simple. Actually, the same structure we can find already in the works of Aristotle. So it should be an introduction, it should be a climax, and should be a denouement. So what is introduction? Introduction is just like introduction to the stage of the action. After that, we have an action that is a rising action. So the action is the tension. So here in introduction, we can see that some tension should be presented. And this tension should be intensified, and it should reach the climax. And climax, what happened in the climax, the change of the plot and the change of the story takes place. And after that, everything goes to the end. Very quickly goes to the end. So the climax should be the main point of the narrative. And if we apply this scheme to the first part of the book of Exodus, we can see that we have an introduction, and here we have a rising action. And the 10 plagues actually is like a rising action because it leads us to a climax. And what is the climax in this case?
Exodus.
Yes, correct. Exodus from Egypt is a climax. So why we speak about this? Because later on it will be very, very important especially when we analyze the second part of the book. And what is also important in this rising action, so that everything is built according to the cycle. And the cycle is very simple. Moses is going between Pharaoh and God, Pharaoh and God, Pharaoh and God. So what happens in the story? God tells something to Moses. Moses went to Pharaoh. Pharaoh says no. Moses went back to God. God says something else. Moses went again to Pharaoh and again back. So This rising action is built as a cycle when Moses goes back and forth between Pharaoh and God. And somebody has calculated that Moses went 11 times from Pharaoh to God and back. 11 times from Pharaoh to God and back. And now let us speak a little bit about the characters. And when we speak about the narrative analysis, so usually we can speak about protagonist and antagonist. Protagonist is the positive character and antagonist is the negative character. So it is very clear here, and we can speak not only about one protagonist, but the group of protagonists and the group of antagonists. So the protagonist is God and Moses. So they are in one group. And of course, the people of Israel also they are not explicitly expressed as protagonists, but everything is done for them. So definitely they are in the same group. Who is antagonist is also clear. This is Pharaoh and the Egyptians. So these are the negative characters in the book of Exodus. Now, let us discuss the 10 plagues. And 10 plagues are also related very closely to the hardening of the heart of the Pharaoh. I will try to do very quick. Let us just come through it. So there are several ideas about the 10 plagues. For example, the medieval Jewish commentators noticed that the story of plagues have a particular design. In the 12th century, Rabbi Shamuel ben Meir, who lived in northern France, noticed that not all plagues began with Moses coming with a warning to the Pharaoh. For example, the first 9 plagues can be divided into 3 groups, 3 plagues in each group. The first 2 plagues in each group begin with a warning for the Pharaoh. If he doesn't listen, the plague will be executed, while the third plague in each group starts without any warning. So just Moses did it without going to Pharaoh. In the 13th century, Bahai ben Asher and Don Isaac Abravanel noticed the plagues took place in a certain sequence. The first 3 plagues were started by Aaron when he held the staff in his hand. In the next group, the first 2 are started with by God, and the third one is executed by Moses. In the last group of plagues, Moses executes the plagues holding his staff, but staff is not mentioned in the account of the last plague. So we can see some pattern in the sequence of the plague. Some people try to present the 10 plagues as a natural events, but of course all those attempts to do this fail because it is just impossible to describe this as some natural effects without any extraordinary influence. Also, a very important idea is that the 10 plagues are presented as a punishment of the Egyptian gods. So why we can speak like this? Because in Numbers chapter 33 and verse 4, we can read, while the Egyptians were burying all their firstborn, whom the Lord has struck down among them. And what he speaks later on their gods, also the Lord executed judgments. So it looks like the plagues also could be presented as the judgment upon the Egyptian gods. And some scholars try to find the connection here. For example, they try to find the correspondence between a plague, a particular plague, and some of the goddess, some of the goddess of gods of Egypt. Just for example, the first plague, when water was turned to blood, could be presented as a plague directed against the god Tnum, the creator of water and life, or against Hapi, the god of the Nile, or against Osiris, and most probably against Osiris, because the blood of the water of Nile was considered to be the blood of this god. And the second plague could be directed against Heket, the goddess of fertility, who is very often depicted as a toad. The fifth plague, the boils of the cattle, could be the punishment for the goddess Hathor, who is depicted as the cow, or against Apis, a symbol of fertility depicted as a bull. A seventh plague and hail and the locust, eighth plague, could be directed against the god Set, whose power manifested in the wind and storm, or against Isis, the goddess of life, who processed the flax and spun his clothes out of it, or against some other gods. So you can see that sometimes people try to find those parallels between different gods of Egypt and the plagues. And ninth plague, it was darkness. Of course, it was against the sun god, and the sun god was one of the most important gods in the Egyptian pantheon. And the 10th plague could be presented against Pharaoh himself, because Pharaoh in Egypt was half god, half man. And after his death, he got the divinity, so he became like God. And the death of the firstborns could be directed against Pharaoh himself. Yes. One text, the Cannibal Hymn, it's a very famous Egyptian text, says that it was a kind of a prediction. This is the king who will be judged by those whose name is hidden on the day of the killing of the firstborns. So of course, it's because it's very, very old text, like 1,000 years before what happened during the Exodus. So we cannot say exactly what is the meaning of this text, but it's very interesting that some kind of predictions were done about the death of the firstborns. Yes, and the weakness of the approach, when we can see that every god, every plague was directed against a particular god, is that actually we do not know very well all the pantheon of Egyptian gods. And what is also important in the Upper and Lower Egypt, usually they have different pantheons of gods. So there is no consistency here. That is why it's very difficult to find this correspondence between each plague and each god. But the idea is in the Bible, so that we can say that really it was not only the punishment for Pharaoh, but it was also demonstration who is the true God. And also what is important, and this is the important idea, the relationship between plagues and creation. When we can read, for example, and the Lord said to Moses, say to Aaron, take your staff and stretch out your hand over the waters of Egypt, over the rivers, their canals, and their ponds, and all their pools of water, so that they may become blood, and they shall be blood throughout all the land of Egypt, even in vessels of wood and in vessels of stone. And the term vessels or container is the Hebrew term mikveh. The same word is used in Genesis 1:10. God called the dry land earth and the waters, and in the original mikveh hamayim that were gathered together he called seas. This association with the accounts of creation is not a coincidence. In Exodus 7:18, the phrase there shall be blood is very similar to the phrase let they be in Genesis 1. Also, the Nile shall swarm, and the root is sharatz, with frogs that shall come up into your house and into your bedroom and on your bed and into the house of your servants and your people and into your ovens and your kneading bowls. And God said, let the waters swarm, sharatz, with the swarms of living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth across the expanses of the heavens. So we can see again some parallels between the plagues and the story of creation. And the number of plagues, 10, can also correspond to 10 creative acts through which the world was created. And God said, and it is repeated 10 times. So it looks like this punishment on Egypt was like a creation or second creation, so that God creates something. His creativity was manifested here. Now, do you have any questions?
Sorry, Prof, what could we say God is creating with the 10 plagues?
So two ideas could be present here. The first idea is that you can say that God creates his people as a nation again when he brought them out of Egypt. But another issue that could be also present here, and we can see it many times in the Bible, when the punishment or judgment is very often presented as the process a reversal, as the reversal of the creation. For example, we spoke about flood. That flood is actually presented as the reversal of the creation. During the creation, God divided, everything divided. Darkness from light, water from water, dry land from the water, and the verb that is used, badal. So the same word is used everywhere. But what happened during the flood? Everything mixed up again. So we can see that the flood was the reversal of the creation. Here, when we see that the land of Egypt is turned into chaos or to some chaotic state, we can say that God also does this, and this is like a reversal of the creation. Okay, so that is why we can see that some ideas of creation are present in the narrative.
Okay.
Any
I was
other
thinking
question?
along the last point that you made. That's why I asked. I'm saying, Prof, I asked that question because I was thinking along the last point that you made.
Okay.
The point of some kind of a reversal of creation.
Yes, and the reversal of creation you can find very often in many books of the Bible, when judgment is presented as a reversal. Okay, so shall we continue? Now we go to very, I would say, a difficult topic. And this is the topic about the hardening of the Pharaoh's heart.
Excuse me, Prof.
Yes, please.
How can we narrate these plagues that occurs during the times of Moses with what is coming in the relation now?
Again, please.
I'm asking how can we relate the plagues that happens during the time of Moses and those are now coming in the book of Revelation?
Yes. When we speak about the book of Revelation, it is clear that in the book of Revelation, we can see that actually John, the author of the book of Revelation, alludes to the plagues of Egypt. And he says we can speak about another very important topic that we can find in many books of the Bible, and this is the topic of second Exodus. For example, just last week we studied the book of Isaiah. And do you remember in the book of Isaiah, in the end of chapter 11, we can see this allusion to Exodus. When Isaiah says that in the future, God will divide the river, the Egyptian river, into seven streams, so that even a child can cross it. And he says about a big road, and he speaks about many people are coming back from Assyria. So he uses the idea of second Exodus to describe the exodus of people of the Israelites from the slavery, from the captivity. And the same idea of second Exodus we can find in many other books of the Bible. Not only it is in Isaiah, in the first part of the book of Isaiah, in the second part of the book of Isaiah, this idea is present again. So God will perform an exodus, a new exodus, and the salvation of the people is presented as the second exodus of Egypt. So I believe John also uses the same image. He speaks about the final salvation of the all people as second Exodus. And he reinforces this account with the account of the plagues. So the same plagues that were done in Egypt, they will be done in the very last moment of the earth history before this final Exodus. Okay?
Yes, Prof.
Okay, let's continue. So now we will go to a very, very difficult topic, and this is a topic about the hardening of the Pharaoh's heart. So why I said that the topic is difficult, because so far I myself cannot find an explanation that could be very very exhausted, or the explanation that would fit all the details of the narrative. And there were different analyses of the story about Pharaoh's heart, and different interpretations were presented by different scholars. And from the very beginning, for example, some people ask the question, so why do you have so many plagues? What is the significance of these plagues? And some people say that actually even 3 plagues would be enough just to show who is who in the history, who is God and who is the Pharaoh. Another very important issue when we speak about the plagues, that it is not only the plagues. So we usually say that this is the plagues like punishment, but in the Hebrew text we can find 2 other words to describe the plagues, and one word is sign, is the Hebrew word ot, which means sign, and another is pele, which means miracle. So we can see that plagues are not just plagues, but they have some different functions. And of course, when we speak about the hardening of the Pharaoh's heart and the plagues of Egypt, we cannot avoid this text, Exodus 5:2. So in the very beginning, when Moses came to Pharaoh and he presented the demand of God to set free the people of Israel, Pharaoh asked a question, who is God? And he said, I don't know who God is. And evidently that the purpose of all the signs and the purpose of all the plagues was to show who God is. Pharaoh didn't know God. He said, I don't know who God is. So now God wants to demonstrate Pharaoh who he is. And we can see that one of the most common refrain after almost every plague in the first part of the plagues is that Pharaoh and the Egyptians should know who God is. For example, chapter 7 and verse 5. 7 and verse 5. The Egyptians will know that I am the Lord when I stretch out my hand against Egypt and bring out the Israelites from among them. Or 8 and verse 6. Verse 10. Tomorrow he answered, Moses replied, as you have said, so that you may know there is no one like the Lord our God. So again, the same idea is repeated. Verse 22 of chapter 8. But on that day I will give special treatment to the land of Goshen, where my people are living. No flies will be there. This way you will know that I, the Lord, am in the land, and so on and so forth. So we can see that the idea that is repeated in many, many plagues is the purpose of the plague and why the plagues are given. That Pharaoh should know, and not only the Pharaoh, but the Egyptians should know and should understand who God is. So it's like a deductive purpose. Pharaoh didn't know who God is, and God says, okay, I will teach you who am I, and you will know who I who I am. Okay, so when we speak about the hardening of the heart of Pharaoh, we can see that, yes, I see the question. Please, Pastor Paswa.
So, I'm sorry, real quick, Prof. Is there a reason or is there some significance that we can derive from the use of the tetragrammaton in what Pharaoh is saying, that I know not the Lord? Because in chapter 5, verse 2 specifically, the tetragrammaton is used.
Yes.
Actually, even in chapter 5, I mean, in verse 1. So I'm saying, in light of what you said about God making himself known, could there be a significance that that particular word is
Yes,
the proper
yes.
name is used?
Of course, it is important. God, and do you see, it is also important in what sense? The same name could have different meaning for different people. What I mean. So do you see, for Moses, the name Yahweh, as he understood later on, meant a God who is merciful, who is full of love, who is forgiving God, and so on and so forth. But for the Pharaoh, this name Yahweh meant completely different, had a completely different meaning, because for Pharaoh, Yahweh means God who punishes. Okay, so I think it has a meaning. It has significance that the word Yahweh is used. Actually, really, Pharaoh didn't know about Yahweh. How could he know about him? Yeah. But also, it was clear that Yahweh presented himself in this story as a God of the God of Israelites. And one more particular issue we need to remember in this story of plagues. Actually, do you see, God is always behind the stage. He is not visible. He doesn't speak to Pharaoh, and he doesn't speak to God, to the Israelites. He is somewhere behind the stage. What the Pharaoh sees, he sees only Moses. Moses and Aaron come and they just perform some miracles, but they didn't see, Pharaoh didn't see God. The same true about the Israelites. What they see, what do they see? They see only Moses. They cannot see God. And maybe because of that, later on, as soon as some difficulty comes, what they say? They say, okay, Moses, you brought us out of the land of Egypt. So why did you do this? Okay, so they do not say that God brought us out from the land of Egypt, but they say it was done by Moses. So God is always behind the stage, so he is not visible. He is visible neither to Pharaoh nor to the Israelites. So shall we proceed?
Thank you so much, Prof.
And now let us go to the verbs that are used to describe the hardening of the heart of Pharaoh. So three verbs are used. And the first one is chazak. And chazak means to do strong, strengthen, and to harden. So a very good example of the usage of this verb we can find in the book of Ezekiel. So because the name Ezekiel in Hebrew sounds like Yehezkiel, and the same root is used, chazak. And the story of Ezekiel's call is very interesting because God said to Ezekiel, you are going to people who have a very firm or hard forehead, and I will make you even stronger. I will make you even harder than they are. So you will be able to minister to these people. Another word which is also used to describe the hardening of the heart of Pharaoh is the word kaved. This word has two meanings. The first meaning is connected to the root glory, and another meaning is connected to the word to be heavy. And most probably we have here Hebrew idiom, because being heavy means to be in
Rich,
honor.
wealthy.
Yes. So if you have a weight, so it means that you have glory, you are a rich person, you are a heavy person. And of course, the another meaning is to make heavy in terms to harden, to make hard. And another word, kaseh, that is used only one time, and it is also to describe, especially to describe neck, hard, naked. Yes, this description in Hebrew in English. You are the stuffed people, yes, stuff-necked, something like this. So this term, and this term, what is interesting, later on is applied to the Israelite kaseh. So also what makes the study very difficult, that we have three different phrases, like God hardens the heart of Pharaoh, Pharaoh himself hardens his heart, and the heart of the Pharaoh got hardened. So these three phrases are used throughout the narrative. And it's very difficult to understand. For example, some people try to say that one verb is meaning hardening, and like one word like hazak, for example, means to strengthen. So God wanted to strengthen the heart of the Pharaoh, but Pharaoh, on the contrary, made his heart heavy. But in fact, we cannot say like this, because both expressions are used with both verbs. And also it's very difficult to describe, to see some differences between them. So, and what is also very, very important, there is one plague which was a turning point in the course of plagues. So, and this plague is the seventh plague, because after the seventh plague, we can see that some changes took place. So I remind you that the seventh plague is the plague of hail. So when the hail was brought to the land of Egypt. And what is interesting, what happened after the seventh plague, we can see that some people, some Egyptians already understood who God is. And they gathered all their cattle, all their flocks, and brought them to the houses. And in such a way, they protected their property from destruction. But those who didn't do this, evidently all their cattle, all their animals died. So also what happened after the seventh plague, Pharaoh confesses his sin. When Moses and Aaron came, he says, forgive me, I committed a sin. So it looks like Pharaoh admitted his guilt, and he acknowledged that he is a sinner. Of course, another thing how sincere he was, but anyway, he acknowledged that he was a sinner. And what is also important, after this seventh plague, we can see that there is a new rationale or new purpose of the plagues is introduced. So if before, the most common phrase after each plague was that Pharaoh or Egyptians should know who God is, now when Moses speaks to the people, he says that you, the Israelites, may tell in the hearing of your son and of your grandson how I have dealt harshly with the Egyptians, and what signs I have done among them, that you may know that I am the Lord. So do you see the difference? If before we can see that the plagues were given to teach Pharaoh and the Egyptians. Now we can see that the last 3 plagues are given in order to teach the Israelites who God is. And what is also important, in chapter 10 of the book of Exodus, we can read that actually some people, some officials, princes, came to Pharaoh and told, so please let those people go. Let them go, because do you see, the Egypt is ruined. Let us read this verse together. Is this chapter 10? Yes, and verse 7. Pharaoh's officials asked him, how long must this man be a snare to us? Let the man go, or let the people go, so that they may worship the Lord their God. Don't you realize yet that Egypt is devastated? So it is probably hard to imagine that in such a country as Egypt, some officials came to Pharaoh and started dictating him what he is supposed to do. And evidently, what we can see, the Egyptians already understood who God is. So they know who God is, they understood it. But the purpose of the rest of the plagues is not given mostly to the Pharaoh and the Egyptians, but mostly it is given to the Israelites. So Israelites also should understand who God is. This is the book of Exodus. We read from the book of Exodus, of course. And when we speak about the Israelites, we can see that the Israelites in the book of Exodus are presented as very, very passive people. So, for example, in the very beginning, when Moses came and said that God appeared to him and God wants to deliver his people, they accept this news with a joy. But later on, as soon as some difficulties come, they blame Moses for making their life even harder. So they are not very patriotic. They are not very much concerned in their own salvation. And after that, we can see that no reaction is given about how they perceive, how they react to the plagues that are given. So in this case, we can see that people of Israel are very passive. And even after the 10 plagues, we can see that they still do not understand who God is, because when they stood at the shore of the Red Sea and the army of Pharaoh is pursuing them, they again blame Moses for everything that he had done. So they do not trust God. So they do not understand who God is. So it looks like those 10 plagues were not enough for the people of Israel to understand who God is. And what is interesting, after the 7th plague, only one type of expression is used. It is no longer said that the Pharaoh had hardened his heart, but only that the Lord had hardened the heart of the Pharaoh. Thus, the last signs were needed not so much for the Egyptians as for the Israelites. The Israelites had to understand who God is. So in this case, how can we explain in general the hardening of the heart of the Pharaoh? We can explain it like this. So actually, from the very beginning, it was clear that Pharaoh is doomed. So he will not listen to God's voice, and God used him in order to demonstrate the greatness of his power. And it was needed not only for Pharaoh, it was needed also for the Israelites. And the Israelites, as I said, are presented not very negatively. They are not presented negatively in the first part of the book of Exodus, but at least they are not presented positively. So they still do not understand even in the very end. So it looks like for the Egyptians, 7 plagues were enough to understand who God is. But for the Israelites, even 10 plagues were not enough to understand who God is. And the last 3 plagues, God hardened the heart of Pharaoh. But anyway, I believe that his confession that he done, it was just very artificial. So he didn't confess really, but he just confessed because of the pressure of the circumstances. Yes, this is explained that they are portrayed as very, very passive in the book of Exodus, and after the deliverance, they portrayed even negatively, because immediately after the deliverance, they began to grumble, to complain, and to blame Moses for bringing them out of the land of Egypt. And now let us go without the break. And if you have any questions, just please feel free to stop me and ask. And we can go further.
I have a question.
Yes, please.
One question is about after significantly God revealed himself to Pharaoh and the Egyptians as a whole. What significant lesson are we learning today concerning the punishment of the plagues? Secondly, is can we say really, because what we have read is that we have seen also Pharaoh recognizes and his officials that God is there. Can we say that Pharaoh repented?
Okay, so let me start with the second lesson, or second question. So what I see from the story, that Pharaoh didn't repent, even if he said that I repent, but his repentance was not sincere. How I understand. I don't want to say the same about the Egyptians, because the Egyptians, it looks like they understood who God is, but not the Pharaoh. Pharaoh didn't do this. So he said that I confess my sin. Actually, he didn't do it sincerely, and it was clear that he hardened his heart from the very beginning. And even the fact that during the last 3 plagues, God hardened the heart of Pharaoh. So it looks like this heart was already so hard that anyway he would do like he was planning to do. So there is no salvation for him. He is depicted as the person who is lost already. Okay, when we speak about your first question about what kind of lesson we can get from it. So we can get a lot of many different lessons from that story, and the lesson that God protects his people. And you see, he comes as a covenant partner to protect his people, even though his people are not very faithful to him. but anyway, he comes and protects. So he is faithful. And actually, another lesson we can get, that lesson about judgment. So anyway, sooner or later, God will judge this world, and as he judged Pharaoh. And some of the judgments we can see in our world. Okay, so did I answer a question?
Yes, Prof.
Anything else? Okay, so we can continue. Now we go to the second part of the story, and this second part of the story is about how people came out of Egypt, and they are now at Mount Sinai. So what happened at Mount Sinai? And before we go to the details of the story, we need to discuss this structure. And if we apply this Freytag pyramid to the structure, we can see that it is not as simple as it was in the first part of the book. But what we hear here, what we can see here, is again introduction. And this introduction is just chapters 16, 17, 18. And after that, in chapter 19, the first important action happens. So God called his people and he wants to make a covenant with them. And it looks like people are ready to make a covenant with their God. And now we have a rising action, and we have a false climax here, because what is supposed to be a climax, when Moses went up to the mountain to get the tablets of the law, but instead of being a climax, it became a false climax, because now we can see that the narrative goes back, and there is no climax in this story, in the first part of the story. And again, the narrative is developing, and the climax we can find in chapter 40, when the glory of God settled upon the built tabernacle. And after that, we almost immediately have the end of the book. But here, there is one very, very interesting detail that we need to discuss. And this rising action actually is presented again as a cycle. And Moses is again goes back and forth. But if in the first part of the story, he was going back and forth between Pharaoh and God, now he is doing the same movement between God and his people. And what is also important, Moses makes about 11 ascents to God. So do you remember in the first part of the story, Moses 11 times went come and forth between Pharaoh and God. So here again, he made about 11 of these movements between God and his people. So why I say about, but not exact number, because it's very difficult. The narrative is built in such a way that actually it is very difficult to count how many times Moses went to God. For example, I will give you just a very, very simple example. Exodus 19, and yes, the description of how the 10 Commandments were given. And when we speak about the 10 Commandments, there is a good question. Where was Moses when the 10 Commandments were pronounced? Was he with the people or was he with God? So according to the narrative, it's very difficult to see where Moses was. So that is why we can say just it is about 10 this ascents from people to God we can find in the second part of the narrative. But what is also interesting in this case is that actually, do you see, in the first part of the story, we have protagonist and antagonist. And God and Moses were in the camp of the protagonist, and Egyptians and Pharaoh were in the camp of antagonist. So now when God brought his people out of Egypt, and now they are at Sinai. So the antagonist was not supposed to be in this story. So it should be a story without an antagonist. But what happened in the narrative, we can say that the Israelites took place of antagonist. So the place that before was taken by Pharaoh and the Egyptians now is occupied by the Israelites. And the Israelites function as a kind of a protagonist, or sorry, antagonist in this story. So antagonist is not clearly delineated. Ideally, there should not be any antagonist. However, in the narrative, people take its place. Okay, so now we have half an hour, and let us now discuss a little bit what happened at Sinai. And this is very, very important topic. And before we go to this topic, I would like to go a little bit back to the book of Genesis, because we need to stress some important issues about the worship. It is very clear that the Mount of Sinai had 3 zones of holiness. And these 3 zones of holiness actually correspond 3 departments of the sanctuary. At the foot of the mountain, where all people stood, it corresponds to the yard of the sanctuary. The mountain, to a certain place where the elders and priests climbed, corresponds to the holy place, and the top of the mountain where only Moses could go, this corresponds to the most holy place. So this is the picture from one article written by Angel Rodriguez, our Adventist scholar, and actually he described it like this. So do you see there is a correspondence? The top of the mountain corresponds to the most holy place. This part corresponds to the holy place, and altar corresponds to the outer yard of the holy of the sanctuary, where all people could come. And yes, before we go further, okay. So now it is better to say. Okay, so let's continue according to this presentation, and I will return to the story of Genesis a little bit later. So what we can see here is God actually called his people to his mountain, and the mountain is presented as a sanctuary. So there are some other texts in the Bible that emphasize that actually the Mount of Sinai could be presented as a sanctuary. For example, in the Song of Moses in Exodus chapter 15, we can read, "You have led in your steadfast love the people whom you have redeemed. You have guided them by your strength to your holy abode." So it is clear here that God says that people were guided to the holy place. And evidently, the holy place here is the Mount Sinai. And more clearly, even more clearly, it is seen in verse 17. "You will bring them in and plant them on your own mountain, the place, O Lord, which you have made for your abode, the sanctuary, O Lord, which your hands have established." So according to this text, it is clear that God is bringing people to his sanctuary. And his sanctuary at this moment is the Mount of Sinai, Sinai Mountain. So it is clear that the Mount Sinai is presented here as a sanctuary. And when people came to this mountain, when all people were gathered together at the foot of the mountain, we can see that God announced the promises of the covenant. And those promises of the covenant are very important because here we can see that three specific expressions are used in order to describe what God wanted Israelites to be. And he says that if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, you shall be my treasured possession among all people, for all the earth is mine, and you shall be to me a kingdom of priests, and you shall be to me a holy nation. So let us consider these three special expressions that are used in this book. The first one is treasured possession. This is the Hebrew term segulah, and actually it doesn't occur very often in the Bible, but from other occurrences of this word, we can understand that actually the meaning of the word is something which is very, very valuable. Especially we can cite the First Chronicles chapter 29 and verse 3. Moreover, in addition to all that I have provided for the holy house, I have a treasure of my own, of gold and silver, and because of my devotion to the house of God, I give it to the house of my God. So do you see when the tabernacle was about to be built, David says that except of all things that he prepared for the tabernacle, he has his own treasure, something that is very valuable. So it is not something that belongs to the people, to everybody, but it is his own. And he wants to give it, to devote it to the house of the Lord. So the treasure, the same word is used, segulah, and it means something really very, very valuable, something very cherished by a person. And God promises to make Israel his special treasure. So it means that God wants, for God, they are very, very, very special. So very, very valuable. And he promises that he will make people like this. Another phrase that is used in the same chapter is the phrase royal priesthood. And I need to tell you that this expression is very difficult to translate because many ways of translations are possible. And everything depends on how we translate this phrase. And what is also important, this phrase has never occurred anymore in the Old Testament. So it looks like this is hapax legomenon in the Old Testament. It occurs only once in the book of Exodus chapter 19. And how different scholars try to translate this expression. Royal priesthood, or in Hebrew it is Malchat Kohanim, yes. This could be translated in several ways. So some people translate it like this. This is a state where all citizens will be kings and priests. So it will be a community of the people who are at the same time kings and priests. So it could be a country where there will be the three classes of people: kings, priests, and all others are holy people. And also there are some other variants, but I just picked up the most popular: a kingdom where God will be king and people will be priests. So this is the kingdom of priests, which means that God is the king and all the people are priests. So what could be the correct meaning of the phrase? So what do you think?
I think for me, the option 3, I take it very keenly concerning with the first letter of Peter 2 verse 9.
Okay, very well.
Yes.
So what is said in the First Peter 2 and verse 9? You are the kingdom of priests.
Yes.
Okay. Yes, it's accepted. Yes, correct. Any other ideas?
For me, I believe it's first one.
First one. Why do you think it is the first one?
Yeah, because from the verse that Pastor Karami just quoted, it says the people themselves are a royal priesthood. So it seems like this is a priesthood that is both royal and a priesthood at the same time.
Okay.
And it uses, it takes the expression from this term. And when we're looking at Jesus, who is the model for us, he is a priest after the order of Melchizedek, who was both a priest and a king at the same time.
Good.
And then when you go to the book of Revelation, the Bible tells us that when the people are praising God, they are actually saying that, I think it's chapter 5, you have made us kings and priests unto God.
Very well.
And you go back to First Peter, in the same narration, it says that you are a royal priesthood, a holy nation. So I don't see a need why we have to separate between the holy people and the royal priesthood. So I believe that all these three terms were clubbed together to describe what the Israelites were supposed to be before God.
Thank you very much for your contribution. Yeah, I agree with many things that you said, with everything that you said. But I have a question for you. So how do you understand that the nation where everybody is a priest? How should it work? Everybody is a priest.
Yeah, that one is I think the tricky one. I mean, the how it would work in Israel, I'm not sure, but in the New Testament, I understand it to be the fact that each person would have direct access to God. They would not need an earthly mediator in order for them to approach God.
Okay, very, very well. Yeah, I agree with you. Yes, please.
But in a such nation is that people are priests. That means all kind of any judgments, people are working rightly and uprightly, and in fact, justified through faith. And therefore, they are encompassed by righteousness of God. So none of them have any root of evil. We are pure in nation.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. So let us move forward. And now, yes, one very interesting detail. Do you remember we already spoke about this text? It is written in Exodus chapter 20, 22, 26. And in this text, why it is very interesting, because we can find here an instruction to all the Israelites on how they should approach the altar. And it is implied that all the Israelites could participate in the rituals as priests. But what is interesting, in one of the Targums, and Targum is a translation to Aramaic, and usually Targums are very free translations, so they allow some additions or some changes in the text. So in one of the Targums, the translator, for him, it was like something unacceptable that God speaks about all the Israelites, that they should approach altar not by steps, but by a steep, like a steep, not ladder, but steep surface. So in one of the Targums, it is said that it is this requirements is given not to all the Israelites, but only to the sons of Aaron. But of course, it is an anachronism, because at that time, in chapter 20, Aaron was not yet a high priest. So he was not a priest, and that is why it doesn't make sense to speak here about only the sons of Aaron. But here it said about all the people of Israel. So one more parallel and one more argument that we can have, and this argument we can have from the parallels between the two rituals, the ritual of the covenant, which is described in Exodus chapter 24, and the ritual of the consecration of the priest. So during the ritual of the covenant, one detail is very striking. So Moses, if you remember, he took the blood and he sprinkled the blood over the nation. So all people were sprinkled with the blood of the animal. And actually we cannot find any parallel in any other ritual, but only in the ritual of Exodus 29, where the consecration of the priests is described. So it looks like people were consecrated, or during the ritual of the covenant, people were presented as the priests, as later on only Aaron was consecrated as a priest and his sons, but not all the nations, but only one person. And we can find many parallels between those rituals. Like, for example, the ritual took place at the foot of the mountain, and we already said that the mountain was a sanctuary, and the ritual of the consecration of the priest should take place at the entrance of the tabernacle. People wash their clothes, which implies the washing of the body, and Aaron and his sons also wash their bodies. The blood was sprinkled on the altar. The blood was sprinkled on the altar. People were sprinkled by the blood, and the priests were sprinkled by the blood of the sacrifice. Moses, Aaron, Nadav, and Abihu, and 70 elders went to the mountain and saw God. The priests are consecrated and can enter the tabernacle before God's presence. After that, Moses, Aaron, Nadav, and Abihu, and 70 elders ate and drink. And what is interesting, after the end of the ritual of consecration, the priest also should have a basket of bread, and he can eat. All that the Lord has spoken we will do, and we will be obedient. And Aaron and his sons did all these things that all commanded, so they were obedient to God. So we can find many parallels between these two rituals. And in this case, we can say that all the people of Israel were consecrated as, or when they became a part of the covenant, they became the nation of priests. So they got this priestly function. And as Pastor Poswa noticed, most probably this priestly function means not that they can like perform some rituals, only some rituals, but it means that they have direct access to God. So priests are those who are mediators between a person, between a sinner and God. But in this nation, there is no need for mediators, but the priests are those who have this access to God. So they can enter the tabernacle. They can be together with God, very close to God. And actually, this is the desire of God, so that everybody could be a prophet. as we can see later on in the book of Numbers, and everybody could be a priest. But of course, so you can ask a question. So we can see that it didn't happen in the life of Israel, but we will speak about it a little bit later. And the last expression is the holy nation. The holy nation in Hebrew, it is Goy Kadosh. And this expression is also unique. It doesn't occur anymore in the Old Testament. But in the Old Testament, we can find another expression which occurs quite often. This is Am Kadosh. What is the difference between these two expressions, Am Kadosh and Goy Kadosh? Sometimes you can find some, I don't want to say speculations, but some kind of distinction between these two phrases or two words, Goy and Am. And it is well known that in later Hebrew, the word Goy was usually addressed, was used to address the people who are not the Israelites. For example, all of us would be Goy for the Israelites, and Am was the word which was reserved only for the Israelites as God's nation and God's people. But in fact, it is not true. I think that this distinction between these two terms appeared quite late, maybe in late Hebrew or even in Mishnatic Hebrew, but not in the very beginning. For example, when we can read the same word Goy is used for Abraham, because when he is promised that he will be a great nation, or his descendants will be a great nation, the same name, the same word Goy is used. So in this case, we cannot say that the word Goy is only for other people and Am only for the Israelites. But what is also interesting that this phrase defines the relationship between the people and God. The people as well as God must be holy. God is holy, and that is why people should be holy. So we can see that this main theme of the Pentateuch, that God wants to bless people, to multiply people, to give them land, and to make relationship with them. It is here. We can see it again in the book of Exodus. Yes, and one important issue that I would like you to remember. So what was the purpose of those promises of the covenant? When Adam was in the Garden of Eden, do you remember we spoke that Adam actually was a priest in the Garden of Eden? And because he was given a dominion, we can say that he was a kind of a king. So the promises of the covenant, and it is not only the purpose of the promises of the covenant, but the purpose of all redemption activity of God is to restore people in the status of Adam, which he had before the fall. So actually, when God promises Israelites to be the holy nation, to be the royal priesthood, he actually promises that he will restore them in the status of Adam that he had before the fall. Yes, Pastor Poswa, I saw that you raised your hand.
I'm so sorry, Prof. Would it be okay to say that there is a relation between the people being, for example, a royal priest, meaning they can approach God without a mediator and have communion with him, and then being a holy nation, because it is only through that approaching to God and that relationship with God that they could be a holy nation? Or would that be stretching the thought?
Yeah, so do you see, in order to understand this, we need to go to the syntax of this verse. Okay, let me, and you will see that the syntax is also very, very interesting. I will make it bigger. ואתה אם שמוע תשמעו בקולי ושמרתם את בריתי והייתם לי סגולה מכל העמים כי לי כל הארץ ואתם תהיו לי ממלכת כהנים וגוי קדוש. Okay, so here we have this. He and you will be for me a kingdom of priests or royal priesthood and holy nation. And holy nation. So I wouldn't say it looks like those expressions are parallel expressions. So also it could be called Hendiadys. So do you know what Hendiadys is? Do you remember we spoke about merism? And merism is merism is a kind of Hendiadys. Merism, do you remember when we take two opposite issues or two opposite things and it designates something whole, like day and night,
Yes,
and so on. Hendiadys is the same, but in Hendiadys we don't need to take two opposite things. It could be two things, but these two things mean something whole. So maybe in this case we can see like it is in one package. Hendiadys means. So it is from Greek words hen means one and dia means two. So one in two. Two things, but these two things designate something that is one. So maybe this is like one package. Kingdom of priests or royal priesthood and holy nation. So we cannot divide them. But I agree with you that maybe through this, through being a royal priesthood, they can become a holy nation. So, but the syntax is very
the syntax is, yeah.
Yes. So according to this syntax, I would say that this is a Hendiadys.
All right. It's the right theology from the wrong text.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. Okay, but
right, no.
I would like you to remember this issue that actually the purpose of all these promises is to restore the people in the status of Adam. So Adam was a king in the Garden of Eden, and he was a priest. So and of course he was like a holy nation, and God wants to restore us. And this is actually his purpose, to return us to the Garden of Eden. And it is clearly seen here in those promises. So, but the problem is that actually those promises have not been fulfilled in the life of the Israelites. Because as you see, this phrase, royal priesthood, has never occurred again in the Old Testament, and we can see after a while we can see that actually instead of the royal priesthood where everybody is a priest, we can see a nation. We can see a nation where there is a king, there are some priests, and there is everybody else. So, but not the royal priesthood as it was promised at Sinai. And now we can speak about the obligations of the covenant, and this will be the last topic for today, and we will stop, and we will continue next time, tomorrow. So when we speak about the obligations of the covenant, I need to mention this person. His name is John Mendenhall, and actually he became famous because in, if I'm not mistaken, in 1954, 1954. So we see almost 70 years ago. By the way, he died at the age of 100 years old, just recently, a couple of years ago. He became famous for several things, and one of the things is his article that he published in the journal Biblical Archaeologist in 1954. You can find this article in the JSTOR. And in this article, actually, he argued that the covenant between God and people was made according to the pattern of the Hittites' suzerain treaties. And he found that such treaties played a very important role in human relations. So he found many examples of such treaties, and they had a very particular pattern. And he noticed that this pattern could be found in many treaties in the Bible, or covenants of the Bible. So when we speak about the pattern of the Hittite covenant, so it had several parts. The first part is preamble, and usually in the preamble we have introduction of the sovereign. Or yes, I need to emphasize that this is a sovereign or suzerain treatise. So what does it mean, suzerain treatise? Suzerain is the person who takes a higher position, and vassal is the one who depends on him. Usually those treaties took place when, for example, some minor prince or some minor king wanted to make a treaty with somebody who is more powerful than him. And in this case, he promised his loyalty to the sovereign, and he wanted a kind of protection or kind of some other advantages from the sovereign. So the first part was preamble, or introduction of the sovereign. Then a second part was a historical prologue. And the historical prologue usually describes the relationship between the parties of the covenant before they entered the covenant. And after that, there are a section of stipulations, and stipulations could be of two types, like basic stipulations and detailed stipulations. And document providing for the deposition of a copy of the covenant in the vassal sanctuary and its periodic reading. So the copy of the covenant should be kept in the sanctuary, usually in the sanctuary, and it should be periodically read by the people, so that the people remember that they have a suzerain and they should be loyal to their suzerain. And also there was a list of witnesses. Usually the witnesses were the gods, so because they didn't want the covenant to be broken, so they called God to be the witnesses of this covenant. And the last section are the curses and blessings of the covenant. So if I am faithful to the covenant, I would have some blessings, so some consequences. And if I violate the covenant, so I should expect some curses in my life. And this was done because at that time, do you see, there was no any kind of international law, and in order to protect themselves from something, they did this kind of covenants, agreements with different parties. So when we will come back to this structure of the covenant, when we will speak about the book of Deuteronomy, and we will see that the book of Deuteronomy is done according to this, exactly according to this pattern. So you can find this pattern in the book of Deuteronomy. Also, you can find the same pattern in the book of Joshua, chapter 24. This chapter is also done almost exactly according to the same pattern, and we can find all the almost all parts of the covenant in the Joshua 24 and also in the book of Deuteronomy. But today we will not speak about the book of Deuteronomy or the book of Joshua. You can just at home, read 24th chapter of the book of Joshua and try to identify all those parts of the covenant. But we will speak about the Decalogue today. And Mendenhall, in his article, actually claimed that in Decalogue we have 3 parts repeating from this structure. 3 first section: preamble, introducing the sovereign, historical prologue, and the stipulation. So can you introduce what is the preamble in the 10 commandments?
I am the Lord your God.
Yes, I am the Lord your God. What is the historical prologue?
Brought you out of the land of Egypt.
Yeah, who brought you out of the land of Egypt. And after that, we have the stipulations of the covenant. So we can speak about the Decalogue as the document of a covenant. Okay. So now let us stop here, and we will continue tomorrow. So do you have any questions?
Yes, I have a question, but not related to materials of today.
Okay.
It seems that it is a particular problem I have. Till now, I'm not accessing the e-resources. My machine